The words hit me like a slap across the face at what was supposed to be our family's celebration dinner. Well, you are not really family anyway, Scarlett. You are just adopted. My sister Delilah's voice dripped with venom as she gestured dismissively at me across the mahogany table. The entire restaurant seemed to fall silent, though I knew that was just the shock coursing through my veins. 28 years of believing I belonged somewhere, and in one cruel moment everything shattered. Before we dive into how I made her regret those words forever, I need to know where you are watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. And while you are here, smash that like button because this story of family betrayal and sweet justice is about to get wild. Trust me, you will want to subscribe and hit that notification bell because what happened next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family loyalty and the price of cruelty. The dinner had started innocently enough. Our parents, Margaret and Robert Blackwood, had called a family meeting to discuss the distribution of assets from our late grandmother's estate. Grandmother Eleanor had been the matriarch of our family's textile empire, built from nothing over 60 years ago. I had grown up believing I was an equal heir to this legacy, just as loved and valued as my biological sister Delilah. Delilah had always been the golden child. 3 years older than me, she possessed the classic Blackwood features: platinum blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and a smile that could charm anyone. I, on the other hand, had inherited nothing from the Blackwood gene pool. My dark auburn hair and green eyes had always made me stand out in family photos, but I had never questioned my place in the family hierarchy until that fateful evening. The conversation had begun with Mother explaining Grandmother Eleanor's final wishes. Your grandmother was very specific about her intentions, Mother had said, her manicured fingers nervously adjusting her pearl necklace. She wanted to ensure the family business remains strong for future generations. That was when Father cleared his throat and delivered the first blow. Scarlett, your grandmother left you a modest trust fund. Enough for a comfortable life, but the majority of her assets, including her 51% controlling stake in Blackwood Textiles, will go to Delilah. I felt my stomach drop, but I maintained my composure. I understand that Delilah is older, and perhaps grandmother felt she was better prepared for the responsibility. Delilah's laugh was sharp and cutting. Oh, Scarlett, you sweet, naive thing. This has nothing to do with age or preparation. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. Grandmother always believed in keeping things in the family, real family. The way she emphasized those words sent a chill down my spine. I looked to my parents for clarification, hoping they would correct what sounded like a cruel joke. Instead, Father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Scarlett, you know we love you dearly. You have been our daughter in every way that matters. But blood is blood, Delilah interrupted, clearly enjoying every moment of my confusion and growing distress. Grandmother Eleanor always said that adopted children could never truly understand the weight of family legacy. They do not have the instinct, the natural drive to protect what generations have built. Mother reached across the table to touch my hand, but I pulled away. Scarlett, please understand. Your grandmother was old-fashioned in her thinking. We tried to change her mind many times over the years. You knew about this. My voice came out as barely a whisper. You knew she felt this way about me, and you never told me. We did not want to hurt you unnecessarily, Father said weakly. We hoped that when the time came, she would have reconsidered. Delilah was practically glowing with triumph now. The truth is, Scarlett, you were always living on borrowed time in this family. Did you really think you could just waltz in as a baby and claim equal footing with someone who actually carries the Blackwood bloodline? I felt something breaking inside me, not just my heart, but something deeper. The foundation of everything I had believed about my identity was crumbling beneath my feet. I have worked just as hard as anyone in this family. I graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Business School. I have been working at the company for 5 years, putting in 60-hour weeks. And we appreciate your efforts, Mother said, though her tone suggested I should be grateful for even that acknowledgement. But ultimately, this is about preserving the family name and legacy. Delilah leaned back in her chair, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips. Besides, you should be grateful. Most adopted kids do not get trust funds at all. We could have easily left you with nothing. The callousness of her words was breathtaking. This was the same sister who had claimed to love me, who had been my maid of honor when I married David 3 years ago, who had held my hand when I miscarried our first child last year. I cannot believe you are saying these things, I managed to say, though my voice was shaking with emotion. Oh, come on, Scarlett. Do not act so shocked. Deep down, you had to know this day would come. You had to know that when push came to shove, real family would come first. That was when she delivered the final devastating blow. Well, you are not really family anyway, Scarlett. You are just adopted. The words hung in the air like poison. I looked around the table at the 3 people who had raised me, searching their faces for some sign that they would defend me, that they would tell Delilah she had gone too far. Instead, I saw guilt, discomfort, and worst of all, acceptance of her words. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. I need some air. Scarlett, please do not make a scene, Mother whispered urgently, glancing around at the other diners. A scene? I laughed, and it sounded hollow even to my own ears. You are worried about me making a scene after what just happened. Father signaled for the waiter to bring the check. Let's all just go home and discuss this rationally tomorrow, when everyone has had time to process. But I was already walking away from the table, my mind reeling with the implications of what I had just learned. It was not just about the inheritance, though losing my expected share of the family business was devastating. It was about the fundamental lie my entire life had been built upon. As I walked through the restaurant's elegant dining room, I heard Delilah's voice behind me, deliberately loud enough for other patrons to hear. She always was overly dramatic. I suppose that is what happens when you do not know where you really come from. I sat in my car in the restaurant parking lot for nearly an hour, letting the tears flow freely for the first time. My phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from David wondering where I was and when I would be home. I could not bring myself to respond. How could I explain that everything I thought I knew about my place in the world had just been ripped away? When I finally drove home to our brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, David was waiting in the living room, his face etched with concern. He had already opened a bottle of wine and poured 2 glasses, clearly sensing that something significant had happened. "How did the dinner go?" he asked gently, patting the couch beside him. I collapsed into his arms and told him everything. David listened without interrupting, his jaw growing tighter with each detail. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "I cannot believe they ambushed you like that," he finally said. And Delilah's comments were absolutely inexcusable. The worst part is David. I keep thinking back to all these little moments over the years. Comments that seemed innocent at the time, but now I wonder if there was always this underlying current of me being different, less than. David stroked my hair thoughtfully. "You know what I think? I think you should fight this." "Fight what?" "The will is legal. Grandmother Eleanor had the right to leave her assets to whoever she chose." But did she really make that choice freely? Or was she influenced by others who had their own agenda? I looked up at him, intrigued despite my emotional exhaustion. "What do you mean?" "Think about it, Scarlett. Your grandmother was 89 when she died, the last few years of her life, who was spending the most time with her, who had the most access to influence her decisions." The answer was obvious, Delilah. She had moved back home 2 years ago, ostensibly to help care for grandmother Eleanor as her health declined. She had positioned herself as the devoted granddaughter, while I had been busy building my career and my marriage. You think Delilah manipulated grandmother against me? I think it is worth investigating. Your grandmother always seemed to adore you when I met her. Remember at our wedding, she pulled me aside and told me how proud she was of the woman you had become. She said you had more integrity and drive than anyone else in the family. I did remember that conversation, though I had forgotten about it until David brought it up. Grandmother Eleanor had been surprisingly sharp that day despite being 86. She had made a point of telling several people how proud she was of my accomplishments. But even if Delilah did influence her, what can I do about it now grandmother is gone? It is my word against Delilah's. David was quiet for a moment, then got up and paced to the window overlooking the harbor. Maybe not. Scarlett, do you remember when you were cleaning out grandmother's house after the funeral? Did you take anything personal, any papers or documents? I thought back to that difficult day 3 months ago. Delilah had been very controlling about the process, claiming she needed to handle the important documents herself. But I had been allowed to take some personal mementos, photo albums, a few pieces of jewelry, and a box of old letters and papers from grandmother's desk drawer. I took a box of old papers. They are still in our spare bedroom. I have not had the heart to go through them yet. Maybe we should. An hour later, we were sitting on the floor of our spare bedroom surrounded by decades of correspondence. Most of it was innocuous thank you notes, birthday cards, recipes clipped from magazines. But then I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a letter dated just 6 months before Grandmother Eleanor's death, written in Delilah's distinctive handwriting. The letter was addressed to Grandmother, but it had never been sent. Instead, it appeared to be a draft with several crossed-out lines and revisions. Dear Grandmother Eleanor, I read aloud, my voice trembling. I have been thinking a lot about our conversation regarding the family legacy and what it means to preserve our bloodline for future generations. As you mentioned, there are concerns about whether adopted family members can truly understand the weight of responsibility that comes with our heritage. David leaned closer as I continued reading. I know you have always been fond of Scarlett, but fondness and blood loyalty are two different things. When difficult decisions need to be made for the good of the family business, can we truly count on someone who has no genetic investment in our success? I worry that her emotions might cloud her judgment when hard choices need to be made. The letter went on in this vein for 2 pages, systematically undermining my character and capabilities, while positioning Delilah as the only logical heir. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, subtle enough to seem like genuine concern, while planting seeds of doubt about my loyalty and competence. But the most damning part was at the end. Of course, we would never want Scarlett to feel unwanted or unloved. The trust fund you mentioned would certainly be generous enough to ensure her comfort while keeping the controlling interest in the family where it belongs. David whistled low. She planned this. This was not about your grandmother's genuine wishes. Delilah orchestrated the entire thing. I felt a mixture of vindication and rage. I had been right to sense that something was off about the whole situation, but I also felt a deep sadness about what this revealed about my sister's true feelings toward me. There is more, I said, pulling out another document. This one was a photocopy of a legal document, and it took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. It was a medical power of attorney form giving Delilah decision-making authority over Grandmother Eleanor's medical care during her final months. The date on the form was troubling. It had been executed just 2 weeks before Grandmother updated her will with the new distribution plan. David, look at this. Delilah had medical power of attorney. What if Grandmother was not as mentally sharp as we thought during those final months? What if Delilah was influencing more than just her opinions? We stared at each other as the implications sank in. If Grandmother Eleanor had been experiencing cognitive decline, and Delilah was the one controlling her medical information and access to family members, then the will change might not reflect Grandmother's true wishes at all. But we needed more evidence. What we had found was suspicious, but not necessarily enough to challenge the will in court. We needed to understand exactly what had happened during Grandmother's final months, and who else might have witnessed concerning behavior. I think we need to talk to Dr. Martinez, I said finally. Dr. Martinez had been Grandmother Eleanor's physician for over 20 years. If anyone would know about her mental state during her final months, it would be him. Do you think he would talk to us? I am still listed as an emergency contact on her medical forms, and if Dr. Martinez has concerns about what happened, He might be willing to share them, especially if he suspected elder abuse. David nodded grimly. And we should probably talk to a lawyer. If we are going to challenge this, we need to understand our legal options. As we carefully repacked the documents, I felt something I had not experienced since that devastating dinner hope. For the first time in days, I felt like I might have some control over my situation. Delilah might have thought she was clever, but she had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated me. The next morning, I called in sick to work and began what would become the most important investigation of my life. My first stop was Dr. Martinez's office, where I had made an urgent appointment under the guise of needing medical records for estate planning purposes. Dr. Martinez was a kind man in his 60s who had known our family for decades. He had delivered. Delilah had been there for my adoption medical checkups and had watched us both grow up. When I walked into his office, his expression immediately grew concerned. "Scarlett, my dear, you look terrible. Are you sleeping?" "Not very well, Dr. Martinez. I need to ask you some questions about Grandmother Eleanor's final months, and I need you to be completely honest with me." His expression grew cautious. "You know I cannot discuss specific medical details without proper authorization." "I understand, but I am not asking for her medical records. I am asking for your professional opinion about something that might constitute elder abuse." That got his attention. He leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped tightly on his desk. "What kind of elder abuse?" I took a deep breath and told him about the will, about Delilah's manipulation, and about the concerning documents I had found. I watched his face carefully as I spoke, and I saw something flicker in his eyes when I mentioned Delilah's medical power of attorney. Dr. Martinez was Grandmother Eleanor mentally competent during her final months. He was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with his professional obligations and his personal concerns. Finally, he spoke carefully. "Your grandmother was remarkable for her age. Her physical health was declining, certainly, but her mind remained quite sharp until very near the end. However, I did notice some concerning changes during her final 6 months." "What kind of changes?" "She became increasingly isolated. Delilah claimed she was protecting her from stress and exhaustion, but I found it unusual that your grandmother suddenly stopped wanting to see other family members and friends. Every appointment, Delilah was there answering questions for her, sometimes even speaking over her. I felt my heart racing. Did you ever see Grandmother Eleanor alone?" "I tried, but Delilah was always present. She claimed your grandmother had specifically requested that she be involved in all medical decisions. When I suggested that perhaps other family members should be consulted for major decisions, Delilah became quite defensive. She said that you were too busy with your career to be bothered with such matters. But I was never told about any major medical decisions. I would have dropped everything to be there for her." Dr. Martinez nodded sadly. "That is what I suspected. Scarlett, I want you to know that I documented my concerns in my notes. If you choose to pursue this legally, those records could be subpoenaed." "What specific concerns did you document?" "Unusual medication requests, for one thing. Delilah repeatedly asked about medications that could help with your grandmother's anxiety and agitation, even though I observed no such symptoms when I examined her. She also requested stronger pain medications than seemed necessary for your grandmother's condition." The implications were chilling. If Delilah had been medicating Grandmother Eleanor unnecessarily, it could have affected her cognitive abilities and decision-making capacity. "Dr. Martinez, in your professional opinion, do you believe Grandmother Eleanor was capable of making complex legal decisions during her final months?" He chose his words carefully. "I believe she was capable, but I have concerns about whether she was making those decisions freely without undue influence, or while under the effects of unnecessary medications." That was enough for me to take to a lawyer. My next stop was the law office of Patricia Hamilton, a friend from business school who had gone into estate law. Patricia had built a reputation for taking on cases involving elder abuse and undue influence, and she was known for her tenacious approach to justice. "Scarlett, I have to be honest with you. Patricia said after reviewing the documents I had brought. Challenging a will is never easy and the burden of proof is high, but what you have here is more compelling than most cases I see. Do you think we have a real chance? I think we have enough to warrant a serious investigation. The timing of the medical power of attorney, the draft letter, Dr. Martinez's concerns about isolation and medication, these all point to a pattern of undue influence. Patricia leaned back in her chair, her mind clearly racing through legal strategies. Here is what we are going to do. First, we file a formal challenge to the will based on undue influence and lack of capacity. That will trigger a discovery process where we can subpoena medical records, interview witnesses, and examine the circumstances surrounding the will change. How long does that take? It could take months, possibly over a year. But Scarlett, there is something else you should consider. Challenging the will is going to destroy what is left of your relationship with your family. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Delilah's cruel words at dinner about my parents' passive acceptance of my diminished status in the family. The relationship was already destroyed, I realized. I was just acknowledging the reality. I am prepared. But Patricia, I want you to understand something. This is not just about money. This is about the truth. If my grandmother was manipulated in her final months, if she was isolated from the people who loved her so that Delilah could control her decisions, then that needs to be exposed. I understand. And Scarlett, there is one more thing we should consider. If we can prove that Delilah engaged in this kind of manipulation and potential medication abuse, we are not just talking about a civil matter. This could be criminal elder abuse. The thought of Delilah facing criminal charges should have made me feel satisfied, but instead, I felt a deep sadness about what our family had become. Over the next several weeks, Patricia and I worked methodically to build our case. We interviewed the nursing staff who had cared for grandmother Eleanor during her final months, and their stories were troubling. Multiple nurses reported that Delilah had been controlling about who could visit and when. She had also been present for all medical consultations and had frequently interrupted when the nurses tried to speak directly with grandmother Eleanor. One nurse, Maria Santos, provided particularly damning testimony. Miss Delilah, she was always there, always watching, and she would give Mrs. Blackwood these pills, said they were vitamins, but I never saw no doctor order vitamins like that. Mrs. Blackwood, she would get so sleepy after taking them. We also discovered that Delilah had systematically excluded me from important family meetings and medical updates during grandmother's final months. She had told other family members that I was too busy to be involved while telling me that everything was under control and I did not need to worry. The most shocking discovery came when we subpoenaed grandmother Eleanor's bank records. In the 6 months before her death, there had been unusual financial activity. Large sums had been moved between accounts, expensive purchases had been made, and most concerning of all, Delilah had been added as a joint account holder on several of grandmother's accounts. This is looking more and more like financial elder abuse, Patricia told me as we reviewed the banking records. Delilah was not just influencing the will, she was already helping herself to your grandmother's assets while she was alive. But as we were building our case, something unexpected happened that would change everything. I received a phone call from someone I had not spoken to in years, Aunt Caroline, my father's younger sister. Scarlett, I heard about what happened at dinner and I need to see you immediately. There are things about your adoption that you do not know, things that could change everything. When we met at a quiet coffee shop in Manhattan, Aunt Caroline looked nervous and kept glancing around as if she expected to be overheard. Scarlett, what I'm about to tell you could destroy our family, but after what Delilah did to you, I cannot keep quiet anymore. What are you talking about? Your adoption. It was not what you think it was. You are not some random child that your parents chose to love. Scarlett, you are Robert's biological daughter. The words hit me like a physical blow. That is impossible. I look nothing like him. You look exactly like his mother did at your age. Robert had an affair 28 years ago with a woman named Sarah Mitchell. When she died in a car accident when you were 6 months old, Robert brought you home and convinced Margaret to help him cover it up by pretending you were adopted. I stared at her, unable to process what I was hearing. You are saying that father is actually my biological father? Yes. And Scarlett, there is more. Grandmother Eleanor knew. She always knew. And she left specific instructions about what should happen if the truth ever came out. Aunt Caroline reached into her purse and pulled out a sealed envelope. She gave this to me years ago and made me promise to give it to you if Robert and Margaret ever tried to deny you your rightful inheritance. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope and read the letter inside. It was written in Grandmother Eleanor's familiar handwriting, dated just 2 years before her death. My dearest Scarlett, the letter began. If you are reading this, then I fear that certain members of our family have allowed greed to overcome their integrity. You are not adopted, my dear child. You are Robert's daughter, and therefore my granddaughter by blood, just as much as Delilah is. I have always known this, and I have always intended for you to inherit equally. The letter went on to explain that there was a second will, a more recent one, that divided the estate equally between Delilah and me. This will was hidden in Grandmother Eleanor's safety deposit box, and Aunt Caroline had the key. Why did not you come forward sooner? I asked, my mind reeling from these revelations. Because Eleanor made me promise to only reveal this if you were cheated out of your inheritance. She hoped the family would do right by you naturally, but when I heard what happened at that dinner, I knew the time had come. As I sat there holding the letter that proved my biological connection to the family and the existence of a second will that secured my inheritance, I realized that Delilah's cruelty had been based on a lie. She had spent months manipulating Grandmother Eleanor and poisoning her mind against an adopted daughter who was not even adopted. But more than that, I realized that Grandmother Eleanor had been playing a longer game than any of us had understood. She had been testing the family, waiting to see who would show their true character when they thought no one was watching. Delilah had failed that test spectacularly, and now she was about to face the consequences. Armed with this explosive new evidence, I felt invincible. Patricia and I scheduled an emergency meeting to review the second will and plan our next steps. But as we prepared to expose Delilah's manipulation, I was about to learn that the people closest to you can deliver the most devastating betrayals. The meeting was set for Thursday morning at Patricia's office. I had been careful to keep our discoveries secret, sharing the details only with David and Patricia. Or so I thought. When I arrived at Patricia's office that morning, I found her pacing nervously behind her desk, her usually composed demeanor completely shattered. Scarlett, we have a problem. A big problem. What happened? Someone contacted your father's legal team and informed them about the second will and your aunt's testimony. They filed an emergency injunction this morning, claiming that the safety deposit box contains forged documents and that Caroline is mentally unstable. My heart sank. How could they possibly know about that? The only people who knew were you, me, David, and Caroline. Patricia's expression was grim. That is what we need to figure out. But Scarlett, it gets worse. The injunction also includes allegations that you have been harassing elderly family members and coercing them to fabricate evidence. They are painting you as a desperate adopted daughter who cannot accept her place in the family. I felt the room spinning around me. This is insane. They are turning everything around to make me look like the villain. There is more. They have also filed complaints with the State Bar Association against me, claiming that I am pursuing frivolous litigation and enabling harassment of a grieving family. If these complaints stick, it could seriously damage my practice. I could see the fear in Patricia's eyes, and I realized that my quest for justice was now threatening to destroy the career of someone who had believed in me and taken a risk to help me. Patricia, I am so sorry. I never wanted to put your practice at risk. That is not your fault. But Scarlett, I have to ask you directly, who else knew about our conversation with Caroline? Did you tell anyone else, even casually? I thought back through the conversations of the past week. I had been careful sharing details only with those I trusted completely. Just David. But he would never betray me like this. Are you absolutely certain? Think carefully about any conversations, any phone calls he might have overheard, anyone he might have spoken to. As I mentally retraced the events of the past week, a horrible realization began to dawn on me. David had been unusually interested in the details of my case, asking specific questions about timelines and evidence. He had also been working late several nights, claiming he had urgent projects at his consulting firm. But the detail that made my blood run cold was something I had not thought about until now. David worked for Blackwood Industries' primary competitor, Morrison Holdings. The two companies had been engaged in a hostile takeover battle for months. "Oh my God," I whispered. "Patricia, what if this was never about helping me? What if David has been gathering intelligence for Morrison Holdings?" Patricia's face went pale. "What do you mean?" "David's company has been trying to acquire Blackwood Industries for months. If the family is tied up in legal battles and the company's leadership is in question, it would create the perfect opportunity for a hostile takeover." As the implications sank in, I felt physically sick. The man I had trusted with my deepest secrets, the person who had comforted me through the most painful experience of my life, had been using my family crisis to advance his own professional interests. "We need to check something," Patricia said frantically, typing on her computer. "If David has been feeding information to Morrison Holdings, there might be evidence of unusual trading activity or strategic moves by their company." What we found confirmed my worst fears. Morrison Holdings had made several strategic acquisitions in the past week, positioning themselves perfectly to take advantage of any instability at Blackwood Industries. They had also filed preliminary paperwork for a hostile takeover bid scheduled to be announced within days. "Scarlett, I think your husband has been playing a much longer game than either of us realized. If he can help Morrison Holdings acquire Blackwood Industries, he stands to gain significantly from bonuses and career advancement." I thought about all the times David had encouraged me to fight the will, all his suggestions about investigating Delilah's manipulation. He had not been trying to help me get justice. He had been trying to create maximum chaos and division within my family to benefit his own company. But that means he knew about my biological connection to the family before I did. How is that possible? Patricia pulled up more documents on her computer. "Look at this. Morrison Holdings hired a private investigation firm 3 months ago to research the Blackwood family structure and look for potential vulnerabilities. They would have uncovered the truth about your parentage as part of their due diligence." The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I could barely breathe. David had not just used my pain for his own gain. He had actively manipulated events to make that pain worse. Every moment of comfort he had provided, every word of encouragement had been part of an elaborate deception. "What do we do now?" I asked, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. "First, we need to get to that safety deposit box before they can block access to it permanently. Caroline still has the key, and the injunction might not hold up under scrutiny, but we need to move fast." I called Caroline immediately, but the phone went straight to voicemail. When I tried her home number, a man answered who identified himself as her neighbor. "Miss Caroline was taken to the hospital this morning," he told me. "Seemed like she had some kind of breakdown. Her nephew came to collect her, said the family was worried about her mental state." My heart sank. Delilah had moved faster than we anticipated. If they could paint Caroline as mentally unstable, her testimony about the second will would be worthless. "Patricia, they are destroying every piece of evidence we have. Caroline is in the hospital, probably under some kind of psychiatric hold that Delilah arranged. The safety deposit box is blocked by injunction, and my own husband has been working against me from the beginning." Patricia was quiet for a long moment, clearly trying to think of options. "There might be one more avenue we can pursue. Dr. Martinez mentioned that he documented his concerns about your grandmother's care. Medical records are harder to suppress or discredit than witness testimony. But would that be enough to prove undue influence? It might be, especially if we can show a pattern of medication manipulation that coincided with the will changes. But Scarlett, I need to be honest with you. With the Bar Association complaints and the family's legal team working against us, this case has become significantly more challenging. Are you prepared to keep fighting, even if it means losing everything?" I looked out the window at the bustling city below, thinking about everything I had lost in the past week: my family, my inheritance, my marriage, and possibly my closest allies. But I also thought about Grandmother Eleanor's letter and what she had written about integrity versus greed. I am not doing this for money anymore, Patricia. I am doing this because if we let them get away with this, it means that truth and justice do not matter. It means that the people with the most power and resources can rewrite reality to suit their needs. Then we keep fighting, but we need to be smarter about it. No more trusting anyone unnecessarily, no more sharing information unless absolutely essential, and we need to assume that everything we do will be monitored and countered. As I left Patricia's office, I realized that I was essentially at war with my entire family and the man I had planned to spend my life with. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a clarity of purpose that I had never experienced before. They thought they had destroyed me by taking away everything I thought I could count on. Instead, they had freed me from any obligation to protect people who had never truly cared about me in the first place. That evening, I returned to our brownstone to find David waiting for me with a bottle of champagne and an expensive bouquet of flowers. His smile was warm and loving, the same expression that had fooled me for years. "Hey, beautiful. I thought we should celebrate. I heard that Morrison Holdings is about to make their move on Blackwood Industries. This could be the perfect time for you to distance yourself from your family's toxic dynamics and start fresh." I looked at this man I had once planned to build a life with, marveling at his ability to maintain such a convincing facade. "You are right, David. I think it is time for some major changes. I am so glad you are seeing it that way. You deserve so much better than how they have treated you." I poured myself a glass of the champagne, buying time while I decided how to handle this confrontation. "Tell me something, David. When did Morrison Holdings first approach you about gathering intelligence on my family?" For just a split second, his mask slipped. I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes before he recovered his composure. "I do not know what you mean. Morrison Holdings is just my employer. I have never discussed your family situation with anyone at work." "That is interesting because I have been thinking about the timeline. You started encouraging me to fight the will before I even told you about finding those documents. How did you know there was something to fight for?" David set down his champagne glass carefully. "Scarlett, you are clearly under a lot of stress. I think you are reading too much into innocent comments." "Am I?" "Because I also remember you asking very specific questions about Dr. Martinez and about Caroline. Questions that seemed supportive at the time, but now I realize you were gathering intelligence. You are being paranoid." "Maybe. But I did some research today, David. Morrison Holdings hired private investigators to research my family 3 months ago. They knew about my biological connection to Robert before I did. They knew about Caroline's involvement. They even knew about Dr. Martinez's concerns." David's expression hardened, and for the first time in our relationship, I saw him without his mask of charm and concern. "You do not understand the bigger picture here, Scarlett. Then explain it to me." He stood up and began pacing his carefully maintained facade, completely gone now. "Blackwood Industries is a failing company run by incompetent people who inherited their positions instead of earning them. Morrison Holdings can turn it into something profitable and efficient. Your family's little drama was just a convenient way to accelerate the timeline. So you used my pain and my family crisis to help your company destroy everything my grandmother built. I helped you see the truth about your family. They never valued you, Scarlett. At least Morrison Holdings will put the company's assets to good use, instead of letting them rot under Blackwood mismanagement." The cold calculation in his voice was breathtaking. "How long have you been planning this? Did you marry me just to get access to inside information about my family?" David laughed, and there was no warmth in the sound. "I married you because I thought you were smart enough to see opportunity when it presented itself. But apparently you would rather cling to a family that never wanted you than embrace a future where you could actually matter. I trusted you. I loved you. And I gave you the tools to fight back against people who treated you terribly. You should be thanking me." As I stared at this stranger wearing my husband's face, I heard a soft knock at the front door. David frowned clearly, not expecting anyone. "Are you expecting someone?" he asked. "No," I lied, moving toward the door. I opened it to find a woman I had never seen before, probably in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes. She was holding a manila envelope and looked nervous. "Are you Scarlett Blackwood?" "Yes." "My name is Helen Martinez. I am Dr. Martinez's wife. He sent me because he was worried about your safety after what happened today with your aunt." I glanced back at David, who was clearly listening to every word. "Maybe you should come in." Helen shook her head. "Dr. Martinez said I should only talk to you privately. He has something important to give you, but he is concerned that your communications might be monitored." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, leaving David inside. Helen handed me the envelope. "Your grandmother came to see my husband privately 2 weeks before she died. She was very concerned that she had been making decisions under the influence of medications she did not remember taking. She asked him to document everything and to keep these records separate from her official medical file." I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were detailed medical notes documenting grandmother Eleanor's concerns about memory gaps, unexplained drowsiness, and her suspicion that someone was medicating her without her knowledge. There were also photographs she had taken of pills she found in her food pills that Dr. Martinez had identified as powerful sedatives. She was being drugged. Dr. Martinez believes so, but more importantly, your grandmother recorded a video message during that visit. She was completely lucid and very specific about her wishes regarding her will. Helen handed me a small digital recorder. She made this recording as evidence of her mental state and her true intentions for her estate. Dr. Martinez has kept it safe all this time, waiting for the right moment to come forward. I pressed play on the recorder, and Grandmother Eleanor's voice filled the evening air. She sounded sharp, alert, and deeply concerned. "If anyone is listening to this recording, it means that my worst fears have come true. I believe that Delilah has been drugging me and manipulating me to change my will against my true wishes. My real will, the one that reflects my actual intentions, is in my safety deposit box at First National Bank. Scarlett is my biological granddaughter, not adopted, and she deserves equal inheritance with Delilah. If anything happens to that, well, this recording should serve as evidence of my true intentions and mental capacity." The recording continued with Grandmother Eleanor providing specific details about the drugging, about Delilah's manipulation tactics, and about her regret for not standing up to the family pressure sooner. "Helen, this changes everything. But why did Dr. Martinez not come forward sooner?" "He has been afraid for his safety. After your aunt was hospitalized today, he realized that anyone who threatens their plan is being systematically silenced. He wants to help you, but he needs assurances that you can protect this evidence." "What kind of assurances?" "He wants to turn everything over to the FBI. This is not just about a family dispute anymore. If your grandmother was being drugged and coerced, that is federal elder abuse. And if your husband's company is using this situation to manipulate stock prices and facilitate an illegal takeover, that could be securities fraud." I looked back at our brownstone, where David was probably frantically making phone calls to warn his conspirators that their plans had been exposed. "Helen, tell your husband I am ready to take this to the FBI, but we need to move tonight. I do not think any of us will be safe once they realize what we have." "He thought you might say that. He is waiting in our car around the corner with everything we need to make a formal complaint. Are you ready?" I looked back at the house where I had thought I was building a life with someone I loved. Then I looked at the evidence in my hands that could finally bring justice for Grandmother Eleanor and expose the web of manipulation that had torn my family apart. I am ready. As we walked toward Dr. Martinez's car, I felt something I had not experienced in weeks: hope. Not just for clearing my own name and securing my inheritance, but for making sure that everyone who had participated in this elaborate deception would finally face appropriate consequences. The game was far from over, but for the first time I was not playing defense. 6 months later, I stood in the courthouse steps, watching federal agents escort Delilah to a waiting police car, her hands cuffed behind her back. The morning sun caught the tears streaming down her face as photographers captured what would become the defining image of the Blackwood Industries scandal. The FBI investigation had moved swiftly once Dr. Martinez provided his evidence. The charges were extensive elder abuse fraud, conspiracy, and securities manipulation. But it was not just Delilah who faced justice that day. David had been arrested 3 weeks earlier on charges of securities fraud and conspiracy to manipulate stock prices. The investigation revealed that Morrison Holdings had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to destabilize Blackwood Industries from within, using David's access to our family as their primary intelligence source. His betrayal ran even deeper than I had initially suspected. He had been recording our private conversations and sharing detailed family information for over 2 years, not just during the inheritance crisis. The most shocking revelation came when forensic accountants discovered that David had been slowly draining my personal investment accounts to fund his participation in the scheme. The man I had trusted with my heart and my financial security had been systematically stealing from me while pretending to love and support me. My parents, Robert and Margaret, faced their own consequences. While they were not charged criminally, the public revelation of their decades-long lie about my adoption destroyed their reputation in society circles that had defined their entire adult lives. Robert resigned from his position as CEO of Blackwood Industries rather than face a shareholder revolt. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when the real will was finally executed. Grandmother Eleanor's true wishes were honored, and I inherited my rightful 51% controlling stake in the company. The trust fund that Delilah had so condescendingly mentioned turned out to be worth far more than she had led me to believe. Grandmother Eleanor had been shrewdly investing for years to ensure I would be financially independent, regardless of family dynamics. Caroline, who had been released from the psychiatric facility once the FBI investigation revealed that her hospitalization was part of the cover-up, became an invaluable ally in rebuilding family relationships with the few relatives who had not been involved in the deception. Her courage in coming forward despite the personal risk had been the catalyst for everything that followed. As I walked back into the courthouse for the final sentencing hearing, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. The shy, insecure woman who had been devastated by cruel comments at a family dinner had been replaced by someone I barely recognized, a woman who had learned to trust her own instincts and fight for what was right, regardless of personal cost. Dr. Martinez approached me in the courthouse lobby, his face beaming with satisfaction. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you, Scarlett. You proved that her faith in your character was absolutely justified. I could not have done any of this without your courage in preserving that evidence, Dr. Martinez. You risked everything to help me. It was the right thing to do. No one should be able to prey on vulnerable elderly people and get away with it." The sentencing hearing was swift. Delilah received 5 years in federal prison for elder abuse and fraud. David got 7 years for his role in the securities manipulation scheme. Morrison Holdings faced massive fines, and their executives received prison sentences ranging from 3 to 10 years. But beyond the legal victories, the real transformation was in how I viewed family and loyalty. The biological connections that had once seemed so important proved to be meaningless when not backed up by genuine love and respect. Meanwhile, people like Dr. Martinez, Patricia, and Caroline, who had no obligation to help me, had risked their own security to ensure justice was served. In the months following the trials, I used my position as majority shareholder of Blackwood Industries to transform the company culture completely. I established an ethics committee, implemented whistleblower protections, and created a foundation focused on elder abuse prevention. The company not only survived the scandal, but became more profitable than it had ever been under the previous leadership. I also made personal changes that reflected my new understanding of what family really means. I divorced David and sold our brownstone using the proceeds to buy a beautiful farmhouse in Vermont, where I could start fresh. I adopted two rescue dogs and began dating someone I met through volunteer work at an elder care facility, a man whose kindness and integrity reminded me what healthy relationships should look like. Caroline became like a true aunt to me, and we spent holidays together along with Dr. Martinez and his wife Helen, who had become dear friends. We created our own family traditions based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation or genetic connection. The most unexpected relationship that developed was with Margaret, my adoptive mother. Once the truth about my parentage came out and Robert's deception was exposed, she found the courage to reach out and apologize for her role in the conspiracy of silence. She had been living with the guilt of the lie for 28 years, she told me, and while she could not undo the damage, she wanted to try to build a genuine relationship based on honesty. It took time, but we slowly developed a cautious friendship. She would never be the mother figure I had once believed her to be, but she became someone I could respect for her willingness to acknowledge her mistakes and work toward making amends. As for Delilah, she wrote me several letters from prison over the years, alternating between bitter accusations and tearful apologies. I read them all, but never responded. Some wounds cut too deep for forgiveness, and some betrayals reveal character flaws too fundamental to overcome with time or regret. Looking back now, I realize that Delilah's cruelty at that family dinner was actually the greatest gift she could have given me. Her words forced me to examine the foundation of my entire life and discover that much of what I had believed was built on lies and manipulation. The process of fighting for truth and justice taught me who I really was and what I was capable of achieving. Standing in my Vermont kitchen 3 years later, preparing dinner for Caroline and the Martinez family, I felt a contentment that I had never experienced during my years of trying to fit into a family that never truly valued me. The dogs were playing in the yard, the table was set with my grandmother's china that I had inherited, and I was surrounded by people who loved me for exactly who I was. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever discovered that people you trusted were working against you behind the scenes? Have you had to choose between family loyalty and your own integrity? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories help me understand that these kinds of family betrayals are more common than we like to admit. If this story of fighting back against family manipulation and corporate conspiracy spoke to you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about standing up for what is right, even when it costs everything. Share this with someone who needs to hear that justice is possible, even when the odds seem impossible. Thank you for joining me on this journey from family betrayal to personal empowerment. Remember that sometimes the family that hurts you the most is the one you were born into, while the family that saves you is the one you choose for yourself. Until next time, keep fighting for truth. Keep building relationships based on genuine respect, and never let anyone make you feel small because of circumstances beyond your control.